We've all heard the saying before, patience is a virtue. Sometimes, with things like that, we can hear them so much that they almost become inaudible. We don't hear them anymore, or they fly right past us without leaving any impact. When it comes to art, the original statement is perhaps doubly true, though. Patience is a virtue when it comes to art, partly because it requires patience, but also because it teaches patience. Yet, it is also just frustrating. No one wants to be taught patience. We just want to have the thing that someone is telling us to be patient for. I would actually prefer to have my dessert now, rather than being patient and waiting till after dinner, thank you very much. I don't want to wait to get good at art. And yet, there is no other solution. Patience is something that you have to possess if you are going to wade through life and through art, or else the journey will be miserable and miserable only. Well, my name is Zach. On that very pleasant note, welcome to episode 88 of the podcast. Today we are discussing patience, why it is so important, and also why it's so agitating, and finally, why it's so important specifically when it comes to art making. As usual, I'm going to explore what I mean by the topic, then go over how this might actually affect you as an artist, and then I'm going to add my own personal thoughts and struggles at the end. So please stay tuned for that. Feel free to check out the Discord and Patreon link below as we get started. And actually, as we get started, in what areas do you find patience easy in your life? And what areas do you find it almost comically agitating? Let us know in the comments. Loading times drive me up a wall, but I can sit and be bored on a long drive or waiting room with no agitation whatsoever. So that's just my sneak peek there. Normally, I would talk about patience now, what it is and such, but I think we can just slide into the actual topics. The fact that art requires a lot of patience and yet teaches you patience at the same time. And of course, at the end, we'll have to talk about why this discussion matters in the first place. So let's start with the requirement of patience. This is perhaps the most difficult part of this entire conversation. I think I've talked about this on the channel several times before and probably will several times more. When I started this channel, I was 35 years old, if I remember correctly. Now I'm 38, and I think every year, the older I get, the more important patience becomes. It's funny though, talking to a kid about patience always feels like an exercise in futility. I've got a 6-year-old daughter right now. She just turned 6. I'm recording this on June 3rd of 2025. And anytime I try to talk to her about patience, it just feels almost comical in the background. I try not to smile because often she's quite frustrated, and I don't want her to feel as if I'm mocking her frustration in that moment. But we talk about things like art. She will draw something and then be frustrated and kind of push it away and go, I didn't get the size of the face correct. The ears don't look right. And I try to talk to her about how she's going to have to be patient, that it's going to take some time to build those skills, that you are going to make a lot of drawings that don't quite satisfy you, they're not quite as good as you want, and that those just pave the way for things. And I feel like she tries as hard as she can with her 6-year-old mind to wrap her head around that, to trust her dad. But I have to let my mind float to when she has a timeout for something, or she's got to wait 5 minutes before she can do a thing, and 5 minutes feels like an eternity to her. So trying to talk to a young kid like that about being patient is just, it feels like an exercise in futility. So when you pull that ahead, and me talking to my students who were, 6th to 12th grade, so 12 years old potentially to 18 years old, it's also a very different exercise to talk to younger students about patience. I am getting close to 40, and so waiting 6 months for something just doesn't feel like a big deal. But I remember being 16 and 17 and looking at planning a vacation for spring break or summer or something and feeling like that was an intangible amount of time away. How could I possibly wait 6 months or 9 months for something? When a book or a video game would get announced and it would be releasing next year, it's just like, well, I'm just going to go ahead and forget about that because it's so far away. It's almost intangible. And that's comically different now. I feel like nowadays I often plan for things 2, 3, 5 years out, and it just doesn't faze me. It's not a big deal anymore. So when you are talking about patience, or rather, I suppose, when I am talking about patience, understand that where you are in life and predominantly how old you are, how patient you've had to be up until this point, it's going to impact things in dramatically different ways depending on your individual perspective. And I think that's important to understand. If you are younger and you're hearing this, I might sound like the old codger who's just telling you to be patient, but also yelling, get off my grass. And maybe there is a little element of that. If you're older than me, you're probably going like, oh, you don't understand patience yet. And that's probably true from that particular perspective. But I think it's good as a community for us to understand that patience is a dramatically different thing depending on where you are in life. And if you are younger, I don't think there's anything special you can do to grit your teeth and bear it better. And likewise, when you're older, like you just have that understanding. It's not something you can necessarily dismantle from yourself and put it into the younger folk. It's just a harder struggle when you're younger, I think. But if you have any other thoughts on that, or like strategies that could help younger people or people who haven't had to deal with being patient, a ton, to understand that better and to imbibe of it, like let me know in the comments, because that would be a wonderful tool for the younger folk. But going back to where this started with patience being a virtue, like how does this apply to art specifically? I think we all kind of innately understand that it's going to take a long time to make art. Is that really where this stops? In a lot of ways, I feel like you need a certain amount of patience to really begin to pull anything meaningful from art. If you have little to no patience, you likely won't stick with anything artistic long enough to get some nourishment. It's a strange inhibitor. You have to practice patience just to get into art in the first place, to sink your teeth into it. I think sometimes this is what puts people off of art in the first place. Over the years of teaching, watching students, but also just watching colleagues and friends attempt new hobbies, it seems like most of the time people start something and don't achieve what they want with it, it's because they lack patience. They lack the patience to stick to it long enough to actually pull out the satisfying results that they're searching for. Now, this applies in my observations to creative endeavors, not everything, obviously, and these are pretty broad strokes, but I feel like you have to start with assumptions and painting with broad strokes like this in order to actually get anywhere in some kind of discussion. But it's this weird juxtaposition, right? That art requires a lot of patience just to get into it. I'm thinking back to the couple times where I started with older students who had never taken any art classes before. A lot of times this happened with high schoolers whom I had taught kind of as an ancillary teacher. Maybe they had required classes with me in middle school or elementary, and they were generally very, very academic. So all of their class time was taken up with advanced mathematics and engineering classes and things like that. But sometimes as a junior or a senior, they would finally have an opening in their schedule and could take a drawing or a painting class with me. Now, when those students came in, they were often very excited to get back to an art class, and then were pretty soon gutted by the fact that they were just so far behind from their own individual perspectives. Especially if you have very advanced students, when they approach something that they no longer feel advanced in, it can often be really frustrating. I'm sure that you can relate to that. And the reality is, in those situations, those students would often hit a wall pretty quickly getting back into art and would feel like they were a failure. A lot of them actually would try to transfer out of the class or would try to leave it at semester, mostly because it felt uncomfortable to them. I have a specific student I'm thinking of right now who was almost a savant at everything else. He skipped a grade at our very rigorous school, managed to do 2 years worth of curriculum in 1 year, was just ludicrously intelligent. And yet the art class was troubling for him because it was the one area of school where he wasn't immediately proficient. And in talking to his parents, they were both like, yeah, we know, and that's why we want him there. Like, he needs to understand that he's not going to be great at everything he runs into in life. But it was very frustrating for him. He wasn't used to being patient when it came to academic things, and he had to be patient with art. It took a lot of time, a lot more time in comparison to his other academic studies, to develop the skills of seeing light, of depicting shading, of making things look three-dimensional. And he did accelerate really quickly because he was very intelligent, but it was very frustrating for him, much more so than his math classes, and he was taking 2 or 3 tiers into college level math at 17 years old. Very advanced student. But it's kind of this strange juxtaposition that art requires a lot more patience. It's almost like, when your wheels start spinning out when you're driving and the terrain underneath you is gravelly or muddy. You just can't get any traction. You almost need to have traction to have traction. You need to have patience to be able to have patience here. It's very strange and very difficult. And this entire thing is hard. How do you convince someone to put the time into art when you know it's going to take them a long time and they will likely deal with a lot of frustration before they get to where they want to be? It's certainly more difficult than starting a new video game or a book or a TV series. The ramp, the on-ramp to learning art is steeper than a lot of other potential hobbies and interests that somebody might land upon. In fact, the simple notion that it requires patience to crack into it flies in the face of much of how our world works right now. We want what we want quickly, and art really can't be rushed. When you try, you actually get things like AI art, something that is novel but produces a fraction of the satisfaction in the person behind it. I think for a lot of folk, this is what was so tantalizing about artificial intelligence when it came to producing art right away, maybe 2-3 years ago, is it takes a long time to draw or paint something, but it felt almost magical to have that stuff at the tip of your fingers. And I think that's part of what made it so intriguing and interesting and tantalizing and tempting for so many people. I can get the images that I would have to spend years working on the skills in order to develop. And I understand that. It is difficult to stick to art long enough to get to what AI art seems to be able to do quickly. I understand that human need, that human desire. But art is satisfying in part, at least, because of what was sacrificed to get there. I don't know if this makes it more noble than other things, but it certainly seems to play a part. We understand that we're putting all this time into something that will bear fruit, that it will be worth it. If you spend a ton of time working in your garden, planting a tree, tending the tree, and then slack off later and you don't get any apples or pears, or your plants shrivel and die because the summer sun wilts them, you don't get anything out of that interaction. And you have to stick to it long enough to actually bear out the fruit. We don't have a ton of things that are like that in our lives anymore, or at least we don't have as many in comparison to 15, 20, 50 years ago. And so art remains this thing that is inextricably linked to a past form of humanity. I think about the same thing when it comes to writing. Writing takes a long time to develop as a skill, but it also just takes a long time to actually write a book. If you're writing a pretty short novel, you're going for maybe 70 or 80,000 words. That's going to take a long time. Most people, if they get 1,000 words a day, that's great. But that's assuming that everything's planned and you have your idea, or if you're just pantsing it and going, off the seat of your pants, that things turn out right the first time. And even in that capacity, you're talking 70 days, 80 days straight. You never missed a day. Everything goes perfectly. And of course, as artists, we know that's just never the case. So art remains kind of trapped in the past in a certain way. This thing that still takes a large degree of patience to get started on, a large amount of patience to endure. And I think that's difficult, and it's probably worth noting. But the thing is about all this patience, all this time invested in art, is that it's rewarded. You are rewarded for your patience. Putting in the time, the effort, the sacrifice is rewarding. Patience is a virtue artistically because it allows you to engage with art, to get in there, to stick to it, to produce things that matter and that you will be proud of. Patience is a key that unlocks how art functions. And this is intrinsically true. It's an intrinsic component of art. And yet, for most people, I don't think it would be of much comfort, which is kind of a bummer. It's kind of a sad thing. I know I've stuck to it long enough. I've come back to it enough times. I've watched enough people engage in it. It's easy for me to hold on to that, to understand, hey, if you're a creative person, if you have some need to do this, then it will be worth it. You just got to trust me. You just got to stick to it. But if you are the person on the outside, that feels pretty daunting, especially when there's so many other ways to entertain yourself or potentially to, exercise your creative muscles that feel like they're lower effort. Although I think the reality is that sometimes things are high effort because they're high reward. Or maybe those two are just linked, that things that are high effort have a higher tendency to be high reward. I don't know. That is not this discussion. I feel like that could snowball and go so many different places. But the reality is that the patience is rewarded in art. And unlike a lot of other things, if you are allowing yourself to be patient, if you go in understanding that that's a natural component, you can actually enjoy the journey a lot more. And that's been a huge struggle for me. I'll kind of tap into this a little bit here and mention some more of it later at the end. But my biggest struggle with patience when it comes to art is the fact that I haven't had enough patience. I have wanted to accelerate very, very quickly. Basically, what that's done for me is it makes the journey totally painful. There's no joy in that journey because the whole purpose of it is just to get to the next stage. And I'm sure that you can relate. I'm sure that there's been other places in your life that have been similar. But for me, artistically, for most of my life, the goal has been to get better. There are other things that I want to achieve once I get better, these amorphous, ethereal things, right? But because the goal is just to get better, I have probably only enjoyed 15% of the time of my life I've put into art. Which, of course, if you're listening now and going, I have to be so patient, and you haven't even enjoyed it. Well, I didn't enjoy it because I was approaching it wrong, frankly. My goal was, looking at people in my life who are far better than me and going, I want what they have. I'm trying to get there. And I wasn't enjoying the things that I was good at. I wasn't enjoying the things that I had at my disposal to enjoy in that moment. When I work on drawings like you're seeing in the background right now, I am getting better at things while I do that. I'm getting better at my mark making. My heart rate continues to go down the more I work on art, which means my hands don't tremble as much. I've got some weird nerve stuff. So if my heart rate gets, way up, if I'm kind of stressed out about what I'm drawing, my hands will tremble. I also have just weird, nervous things that sometimes take root in my hands and they will vibrate and I can't get straight lines. The more I exercise, the more I practice, those things go away. And those aren't even conceptual, heady things, but there are a lot of those too. The more frequently I'm drawing, especially with ink, the easier it is for me to conjure the technique that I want to achieve what I want in that moment. It's kind of just becoming second nature. The more I draw, the easier it is to draw. And I enjoy drawing now more than I ever have, particularly because I'm not rushing to get better all the time. I'm constantly working at it, but it's not my sole goal. There's a lot of my drawing nowadays that is just for fun. And ironically, that has enabled me to be more patient, to endure the long journey, and to enjoy every step of that journey just a little bit more. But the odd thing about patience in art is not only is it required, but it also builds patience. I don't particularly know why this is, as I get started on my mental dissection of the concept, right? If you stick with art long enough, it seems to slow you down, to turn your brain into a sloth brain of some kind. And then those long periods of shading, hatching, mixing colors almost seem to be meditative. Certainly, some personalities handle this more quickly and better than others, but it seems from my observations as a teacher that the more time you put into art, the more you slow down. This is kind of a strange thing. I don't know really what's happening here. I don't know if it's a psychological adaptation to just make the process less painful, more pleasurable, but it very much seems to be the case. There's a lot of students that come to my mind as I think about this who were very high energy, who struggled to be patient for anything. The kind of kid that when you see them in elementary school, they'll try any strategy they can to cut the lunch line so they get their food first because they just can't handle standing in lines. Which, little segue I totally relate to. I hate lines. I have this funny comical list of like 30 to 50 things that I just really dislike. And that's high on there. I really dislike lines. There's a lot of other really silly things on there, like peacocks. I got chased in a castle and cornered by peacocks when I was a little kid, so they are like my eternal rival, which the students had lots of fun with. Or the fact that hamburgers are just kind of lame in general. But I'll throw that one out there and, not create any drama at all. But even for those students who hated waiting, who were always trying to speed through everything they could, when they finally sunk their teeth into art, it would become a meditative, slower, beneficial thing for them. There were many times where I would have their parents come in for conferences and they would be so stunned at what their students had put together, particularly because it implied that their kid had sat down or sat still long enough to actually produce that thing. It's funny. Art requires this patience, and for a kid like that, it was very hard to get into it, right? Because there's this heavy barrier to entry. They have to slow down and be patient enough to actually see results. But then once they do, it becomes this thing that starts to give off its own rewards. It starts to turn. It becomes a perpetual motion device where, oh, I can just keep engaging with this. And I think for so many students, especially those who had high pressure situations at home or felt this innate need to keep moving all the time and keep progressing, art is so different. It just did something different in their minds. And again, I wish I had the actual dissection of what's happening psychologically in the human brain with this. If you have any suggestions or any ideas that you've seen in your life, personal or otherwise, I would love to hear about it in the comments, because it's something that is this really ethereal thing that I've observed, but I don't necessarily know why it happens. I do think, though, that this is linked to the fact that so many people, when they get older or they retire, have a tendency to come back to art or to engage with it for the first time. There's this need in their lives to have something to focus on that is meditative, that is rewarding the more time they put into it. I don't know how many people in my life I've seen this occur for, but it is a tremendous amount. I would say upwards of 50% of people who hit their upper 50s or early 60s or get to retirement age turn back to art at some point or turn to it for the first time. It is this interesting occurrence, just this wonderful situation where when you finally relinquish some of that control and you dive into art and you are patient with it and you allow it to be what it is instead of trying to manipulate it into what you want it to be, it becomes rewarding and it becomes this largely beneficial thing for you. But the other part of this section that I'm talking about is once you've kind of given into that, whether you are, at retirement age or you're a high school student, it starts to pay dividends on the development of patience. And I think that some of this just happens because when you're in the zone, when you've put in enough legwork to actually sit there and exist in it and to enjoy what you're working on, I think parts of your brain just lock in. They know exactly what you're going to be doing. It's not very stressful. Sometimes, for people like me who most likely have some ADHD, if not other things, it gives my unconscious mind the ability to process through things. So I will sit there and work on a large field of hatching or tiny details like you see happening in the background right now. And while I'm doing that, I'm processing conversations I had that day. I'm thinking about what I want to do in my book next. I'm relaxing. Maybe I'm rewatching a movie in my mind or poring over some character ideas that I really enjoyed, from that movie that I watched 20 years ago that for some reason I can still conjure up all the details for. And maybe in the not really joy, but the contentment in that moment, patience seems to blossom and to develop and to propagate itself. That long-term investment into something simple, into something meditative, seems to breed patience. I find that the more time I put into art, the more time that I invest into it, the more patient I am in other aspects of my life. And this has been borne out in the other people that I've watched engage with the same things, especially those who have dived into art later in life. It seems to slow them down in a really beneficial way. And yet, it's not just the slowing down, it's an engaging in the moment. And I think really that's the most beneficial thing we can get from patience, perhaps, is that when you're not patient, what are you doing? You are upset about how long something is taking. And that means that you're casting your vision forward. You're focusing more or primarily on the future and what comes next. And there's a lot of wisdom in that. That's how I am built from, the ground up. I focus on the future. I plan. The downside to that is that it detaches you from the moment, and the current moment, is where all potential joy is. And so if you develop more patience, if you allow things like art to help you and propagate that patience, it allows you to focus more on the here and the now. And in that, there's more joy. There's more satisfaction, because everything that's happening in your life is happening right now. I know that seems maybe very simple or trite, but also kind of elusively complex. Welcome to any kind of philosophy, right? You go and read Aristotle, it's like everything he says, it's just like, yeah, of course. Actually, less Aristotle and more Plato and Socrates that way. Aristotle's a little bit more complicated, but still not, crazy complicated. When you go and look at a lot of what Plato and Socrates said, it's just like, oh my goodness, I feel like I'm getting hit with a 2x4 of wisdom, and I still cannot imbibe of it. It's these old, beautiful, simplistic philosophical components that are, obvious, but we still miss them because welcome to being human. I don't know if slowing down is quite the same as developing patience. A lot of this has been focused on these meditative qualities, focusing on the moment, slowing down. I'm not sure if they're the same, but if they're not the same, they are certainly akin to one another. And that's kind of a strange thing in and of itself, that just slowing down is a beneficial thing. And art tends to slow you down. Just like those students I was referring to earlier, in order to get any real results in art, you have to slow down. You've got to work on things. You have to prep in some regard. For some people, it's all mental or it's very, very short. You have to actually spend the time to execute what you're doing. You've got to make marks on a page. And then if you can slow down just a little bit more, you can pull back and you can evaluate and you can go, this is working, this is not. You can make adjustments. You can slowly come back to it again. You relearn how you do things. You learn new methods. And then the next time that you dive in, you're a little bit more slow in the approach. And eventually, that slowness picks up and it becomes faster because you've learned the methodology that you're going to employ. And it's kind of this weird cyclical thing. The more you slow down with your art and really pay attention, you will get faster at making it. But that will probably in turn make you slow down. You'll do larger projects or more projects, or you'll just accomplish more in your time. And yet it will still have that meditative, beautiful component. So art is this strange thing. It requires tremendous amounts of patience just to get into it, just to do anything. But it teaches patience as well. Or at least you cannot stick to it without harnessing the patience you already have and developing more, whether forcefully or by chance. It seems like if you stick to art long enough, if you're patient enough to endure it, it will become this engine that helps you develop further patience, that helps you focus on the moment, that helps you stay in reality and just suck the marrow out of life. And maybe that's the best reason there is to make art, to get into art, especially if it's been this kind of stressful thing for you in the past. So why is this worth talking about in the first place? Obviously, patience is a good thing. I think we all know that. We started this podcast with the idea that patience is a virtue. It's something we've heard very many times. But when it applies to art, why is having this discussion even worth it? I think first of all, there's solace in understanding that your long journey is just like everyone else's. That you are not special in that regard, because special in that regard would mean you were slower than everyone else, that it was harder for you than everyone else. And I guess that is a possibility, but by and large, you're not alone. This journey takes a lot of time. It requires patience. That patience is often hard. Every once in a while, you'll find people that just kind of crack into it and it doesn't bother them too much in the same way. But there's a sense of belonging and understanding that we're all enduring the same thing. And I think that solace is really beneficial. It's good also to remember that there's a reward for the difficulty, for the patience, for what you have to endure. That art, more than most hobbies, I would say, is rewarding pretty much from the earliest days. I know that starting an instrument or writing a book or world building, all of which are things that I've done and put a lot of time into, even learning how to teach, those things took a long time to be rewarding. Some of them tremendous amounts of time, and some were very, very difficult. Art, however, always seems to be rewarding pretty quickly. You have to put in a bit of time, obviously, to learn just the fine motor skills, the basics of how to put things together. But you can see this in some of these wine classes where people go and they, drink a little bit and somebody teaches them how to paint an image that is already very much, lined out for them. Like it's very, very hard to fail. And yet in those things that I mocked in my naivety as a youth, a lot of people find joy for the first time with art. They loosen up a little bit and then they're able to sit there and actually make something and go, oh my goodness, like I made this. And that's the thing with art is it doesn't take a long time before you can start making things that can bring you some joy. Maybe they're still kind of embarrassing to you. You don't want to show them off to other people, but it doesn't take that long before you can make things that are going to start to satisfy you. Whereas learning how to play an instrument can sometimes take months and months and months, if not years, before you really feel the benefits. Writing a book is often exhilarating right at the beginning, but I know no one who has started writing a book and just kept going with it from day one. It always becomes difficult. It is a tremendous task. There's so much involved in it. And so art seems to give that reward for the patience and start giving it in little increments very quickly, very early on. Again, that patience is engaging with the moment. It pulls you out of the future. Hopefully it pulls you out of the past, though I feel like that's, we're going to have to deal with anxieties in order to really, handle that. But patience allows you to focus more on reality, this moment right here, the only thing that really matters. And I think that there's something beautiful about that. It's good, obviously, but it's also just kind of one of those little hacks that can help make every day just a teeny little bit better. And I think lastly here is there's a broad applicability to other areas. When you develop patience in art, you're not just developing it for use in art, you're developing it in general. And we all know that we have to have a lot of patience to just get through life in a way where we can enjoy it in any capacity, especially if you're a parent. I feel like few things have been more trying on my patience than being a parent. And my daughter is wonderful. She is lovely. And yet it still requires a tremendous amount of patience. And my job in the past required a ton of patience. Life, mortgages, rent, landscape work, like everything requires patience. So it is broadly applicable. The patience you develop in art will be applied everywhere else. Well, what about my thoughts, my personal perspective on this? Well, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, I am not a patient person by nature. I've got certain things that I can exist in spaces and be bored with the mundane for a tremendous amount of time. I don't get bored easily. I was always like this as a kid. If I had a book, if I had a sketchbook, if I was even just left alone with my own thoughts, I can usually entertain myself pretty well. So I handle being bored really well, but I don't handle waiting. Like, I hate lines. I will just not think about vacations that are coming up because being patient for them is difficult for me. So I basically just ignore them until they're here, essentially. I have a tendency to, by my nature, not consider things that require patience and just let them kind of come to fruition. And it's not a great strategy. In my older age, I'm not really all that old yet, but I'm certainly older than I was, I have gotten better at it. Particularly, I think this just happens with getting older. You end up, having more time to look back on, so it becomes less daunting to think about waiting for days or weeks or months or even years sometimes for things. And that helps. But I am not patient by nature. The artistic journey has been a very difficult one for me because I want to see results and I want to see them inside of like a couple weeks or even a couple months, and pretty much never have. It's always taken longer. 3 months I think is about the shortest time that I've ever seen really sizable jumps in my artistic skill. And that's always been mildly agitating and saddening for me. It always, put me in this place where I was wondering if any of this was worth it, if there's any point, if I really am growing, can I do this? And that predominantly comes down to struggling with patience. So for me, art has helped me understand that good things often have to be waited for. And I am far more patient now, partially just getting older, but I think art has actually helped me develop a lot of patience as well. When I work on big pieces that take 10, 15, 20 hours, that's something that in my youth would have bothered me. I would have sat there and it would have just bugged me that it's taking so long. And nowadays it's just, no, I'm just going to keep going on it until it's ready, until it's done. And it's been a good development for me, but by and large, patience is something I struggle with. So, well, thanks for being here. I hope that this has been beneficial. This is a little bit different than some of my others. If there's any other things like this you would like me to talk about in future episodes, let me know in the comments below. It's always better from my perspective to do these as something that feels like serving the community need rather than just talking about random things that come up in my mind. Thinking of my patrons who are on the screen right now. If you want to check out the Patreon, you can. It is linked below in the description. Well, have a good one, y'all. See you soon.